thanks so much for the music today, and thanks to everyone who's making today possible. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the common mistake of adopting a philosophical term without understanding that term's context or even its reason for being. My example at that time was the term lived experience. We hear it everywhere nowadays, but a very incisive question to ask when you hear that term is, what is dead experience? Don't only lived experiences actually get experienced? As far as we know, yes. Only the living have lived experiences. But, as I pointed out then, the term exists to complement another term, lived body. But wait a minute, don't we have to have a body in order to live? Well, at least for now, yes. But we're getting somewhere when we begin to think about those two terms, lived experience and lived body. They're terms designed philosophically to help us see that we are not merely walking minds filled with consciousness, that we are not disembodied spirits floating around in the universe. We are right here. Our experience in our lives and in our bodies, okay, it's a little grainy, it's a little salty, it's a little painful, but it's also luscious to have flesh, isn't it? And that experience is our only experience of consciousness. We didn't ask for it. We didn't choose it. We merely have it. And we have it for a very, very limited time. Lived experience, lived body. Now, take a tree as example. Now, a tree is just a tree, isn't it? Yes, there are facts about trees. You can look them up in books, you can look them up online, you can ask experts. But is there something else? Now, take, for example, a water oak. It's a tree. Many of you probably haven't met one because it doesn't grow in this area, I don't think, but there are a bunch of them where I grew up. My father and grandfather and my uncles taught me about trees. Yes, it was a guy thing among farmers. Knowing which tree is useful for what is indispensable knowledge for farmers where I come from. Water oak is useless in terms of building anything. It just simply rots away. Where I'm from, the best tree for most lumber purposes is white oak, which I also haven't seen around here. White oaks are best, and then for us anyway, and then somewhere in the middle is bur oak, which in this area, I know there are some because we have a Bur Oaks Park in town. So my lived experience of water oaks, white oaks, and bur oaks is a particular kind of lived experience. My experience is about their usefulness around the farm. And my lived body knows it's a heck of a lot harder to chop down and dress out a white oak tree than a water oak tree. And water oaks are only good for firewood in my lived experience. Now, your experience may be that water oaks are the most beautiful things ever. If you grew up somewhere in the southeastern United States, you may have grown up with water oaks growing along the water, yes, and you have precious memories of how beautiful they are beside meandering creeks. Same tree, different experiences of the same tree. Fact is, this example is true of almost everything for almost everybody. Automobiles, beds, fabric, oatmeal, grits, on and on. But why focus on much of our subjective experience? And the answer is, in order to realize that our subjective experience is our subjective experience. Mine, not yours. And this serves two functions. One, so that we examine our own experiences and realize that we are living in our bodies in a particular place and time. My knowledge of water oaks makes absolutely no difference here. And two, so that we realize that our experience is not everyone else's experience. For example, when the subject of being in nature comes up, we all love Thoreau, right? But I usually half-jokingly say that going into the woods isn't relaxing for me. It feels like going to work. Now, some of you may be saying, well, that's terrible. My goodness, you're not enjoying nature? Well, no, it's just different. I have a different lived experience. But how does so many of us then respond to any differences that we notice about all of these things? And often, that's not in a constructive way. You see trees that way? That's just weird. It's a subjective experience. I didn't choose how I feel about trees. My feeling came from my experience. You didn't choose how you feel about trees either. Your feelings come from your lived experience. Now, once we get that crucial fact through our heads, the world begins to look very different, I think. Suddenly, the world is not a collection of facts. Rather, a subjectively constructed reality appears for us, and it is in our subjective experience. Mine is not yours. One of the poisons of the dominant white middle-class mindset here in the United States is that white middle-class people often see their experiences as normative experiences. And unfortunately, many oppressed people also see white middle-class prejudices as normative experiences, and they say, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. My subjective experience is somehow wrong. But here we are at the equinox. Now consider the difference between the subjective experience of that tree I've been talking about and the subjective experience of equinox. Now there's one big difference, isn't there, between those two experiences? All of us can use our sense perceptions to experience a tree in one way or another, but none of us can actually feel when the equinox occurs. We had to look at our watch. Alone, I would never figure out something like that. I would be cutting down trees. The equinox is not an experience because I have it. It's an experience because we all have that experience. Human beings have, amazingly, however, figured out how to make that concrete. I can look at my watch. I can then have an experience. When the sun rose this morning at Stonehenge, for example, people there actually experienced the equinox. The sun rose over that heel stone, great big stone, and those inside the stone circle, they let people in 4 times a year, could see physical evidence of the equinox. That's pretty amazing. They actually experienced that, even though, by the way, the heel stone is 1 degree off nowadays because the sun and the earth are not exactly where they used to be. But notice what has happened. The equinox is a collective social activity because people were able to figure out an astronomical device that made an abstract concept into an experience. That's pretty amazing when you stop to think about it. The difference between a tree and the equinox is an important distinction, and I'll think about that a little bit later more. But now, Jane, take it away and we'll hear about something magical.